Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Get this, no press conferences, no Oval Office speech, no State of the Union. Is President Joe Biden hiding? He's the first president in 4 decades not to have a formal question and answer session. By this point in his presidency, Donald Trump and George H.W. Bush each had 5 press conferences. Bill Clinton had 4, and on down the line. And last week, when the president offered to take questions, here's what happened.
And I'm happy to take questions if that's what I'm supposed to do, Nance, whatever you want me to do.
In other news, well, what we've got to ask ourselves, folks, before we go to something else, is, if we are looking at this, believe me, the Chinese understand it, the Russians understand it. They know they're dealing with somebody who apparently has some senile difficulty. I don't know whether you call it dementia or what, but they won't let him talk. Whoever his handlers are, don't trust him to go live before a group of reporters. And that is shocking. What are we going to do? Well, there's nothing we can do because somehow or other that election put him in office and Kamala Harris in as his vice president. So when are they going to invoke the 25th Amendment? 36 members of the House of Representatives, all Democrats, asked for a provision that prevented him from having his hand on the nuclear trigger. That's what happened. The group of people around him realized something is seriously wrong, and they don't want him exposed to the normal give and take of a presidential news conference. But so much. Well, in addition to that, like a stuffed sausage, the $1.9 trillion relief COVID bill is packed with pork that has got absolutely nothing to do with the pandemic. $500 million for museums and native language preservation. $1.5 billion for Amtrak. $300 million for humanities and the arts, and more. So who will wind up paying for all the pork? Dale Hurd has this alarming story.
The House is scheduled to vote Tuesday on the Senate version of Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. While the Senate removes some pricey items, critics say the bill is still full of pork, most of which has nothing to do with COVID.
I promised the American people that help was on the way. We've taken one more giant step forward in delivering on that promise.
The Senate version removes the $15 minimum wage, cuts off relief checks for incomes above $80,000 for individuals and $160,000 for households, and lowers the federal unemployment boost from $400 to $300. West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin was instrumental in getting rid of the $15 minimum wage in the bill, something that's viewed as a job killer.
If everyone agrees it should be raised, but we need to the base of our minimum wage should be above the poverty guideline.
The final vote passed along party lines, with Republicans united against a relief plan loaded with pork barrel spending.
The Senate has never spent $2 trillion in a more haphazard way or through a less rigorous process.
That spending includes $500 million for museums and Native American language preservation, $1.5 billion for Amtrak, and $50 million for environmental justice grants.
Where is this money coming from now that we've got a $28 trillion tab in debt?
Well, it's coming from your children and your grandchildren. It's all borrowed money. There's $200 million for library services. There's over $300 million for the National Endowment of the Humanities and Arts. There's $20 million for native language studies. These all may be good ideas, but they got nothing to do with COVID.
Mark Hamrick, Washington bureau chief and senior economic analyst at Bankrate.com, says the massive government spending will help the economy in the coming months, but raises the threat of inflation.
The inflation worry is going to be with us for quite some time, but in the near term, that's going to be more rocket fuel for the recovery.
The bill is expected to pass this week, and checks should go out by the end of the month. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
You know, we're being asked time and time again, what happens if a nation goes bankrupt? Is it possible? The answer is yes, it's possible, because one thing is going to happen. Either you inflate your way out of it so the inflation gets to be such a point that the debt doesn't mean anything, which of course cripples everything else in your economy, or you raise taxes to a point where you can start paying it off. And before long, as we pointed out a few days ago on this program, the amount of interest on the federal debt, if it's just 1 or 2% a raise, will eclipse all the other spending of the entire federal government. It is horrible, and those people in Washington ought to know better, but they don't. They don't seem to care. It is your children and your grandchildren who are going to suffer because of it. Well, in other news, China is now the second global power to target the U.S. in recent months. So what will the Biden administration do about it? Well, we're not really sure. John Jessup has more.
Pat, hackers backed by the Chinese government broke into Microsoft's business email software, so far affecting at least 60,000 customers, most of them medium-sized and small businesses. But it also includes banks and electricity providers. And the hackers are racing to infect as many more as they can before companies shut them out. This attack coming just months after the Russian SolarWinds attack, which infiltrated 9 U.S. government agencies. The Biden administration is preparing retaliation against the Russians for that attack, including economic sanctions. Well, the top Democrat in New York State Senate is now calling on Governor Cuomo to resign. This as 2 more women came forward over the weekend claiming inappropriate conduct. Senate Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, one of the most powerful Democrats in the Empire State, released a statement reading in part, "We need to govern without daily distraction. For the good of the state, Governor Cuomo must resign." In a hastily arranged press conference, Cuomo said that's not going to happen.
There is no way I resign. Let's do the Attorney General investigation. Let's get the findings, and then we'll go from there.
Allegations of impropriety are one of 2 scandals engulfing Cuomo at the moment. His administration also under fire for underreporting COVID-related nursing home deaths. Friday, the Democrat majority legislature voted to roll back his emergency powers for fighting the pandemic. Well, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is telling CBN News Americans should be proud of this country's Judeo-Christian heritage. Pompeo is speaking out about all issues, including his deep concerns about the Biden administration. CBN's David Brody spoke with him recently and has the story.
Mike Pompeo has always been straight-spoken, and in our one-on-one interview, the former Secretary of State didn't disappoint. One of the things on his mind, a new administration that he says doesn't seem to be putting America first.
You know, the big picture challenge is that they just think about America's place in the world so differently than the Trump administration did, right? We had America first at the center of everything we did. This administration seems to have a different set of priorities.
Among his concerns, Joe Biden's views on Iran.
Do you believe this Biden administration is in the appeasement business when it comes to dealing with Iran?
We saw last week that they gave a wink and a nod to what appears to be enormous financial relief to the Iranian regime. We put massive pressure on the regime, and it looks like they're going to allow billions of dollars in wealth to go from South Korea and the IMF into Iran and essentially take a foot off the stranglehold that we had on the Iranian regime. This is not a good start.
Sounds like you're concerned about appeasement for sure.
Yes, I am.
And that concern ties directly to the security of Israel, a situation that concerns him greatly now that the Biden team is in charge.
Are you concerned that they will not be pro-Israel, if you will?
I do worry. Historically, it's been bipartisan. It hasn't been a Republican deal or a Democrat deal. Mm-hmm. This administration was awfully slow on the draw with respect to Israel.
Pompeo clearly doesn't hold back. On China, before he left his post in January, he questioned whether COVID-19 came from a lab in Wuhan. To this day, he still thinks it's very possible.
We don't know for sure, but there's ample evidence and a cover-up that probably is worse than the initial problem set inside the lab that we know, right? We know these Chinese labs that were doing this bio research have had escapes before.
Nowadays, Pompeo is getting his voice out in different ways by joining a couple of think tanks and also on the speaking circuit. At the recent CPAC conference, Pompeo pleased the crowd, even placing in the top 5 of a 2024 presidential straw poll. For now, he's focused on helping the GOP win back Congress in 2022. He has stood side by side with Donald Trump and has a message for those Trump critics.
It is an enormous head scratcher for me when people waver about the legacy of the work that President Trump and our team did for these past 4 years. It's the right direction. When I see Republicans step away and not embrace what it is right for the American people and for our movement, I just don't get it.
As for those Americans who came to peacefully protest the election on January 6th, he stands with them.
Those are folks who just wanted to come express their enormous disappointment with the outcome from the election and the fact that they weren't giving up. They were still in the fight, and I want to be alongside them. I want to be with them in that fight.
He is also taking a stand on faith, especially America's Judeo-Christian history.
What has happened to this country as it relates to from a spiritual standpoint?
I know he's watching over us. This is a very special nation that I have been so privileged to grow up in. Those of us who believe that, those of us who understand the founding and understand the Judeo-Christian traditions of the United States of America, have every responsibility to be bold, to speak about this, to be proud of this heritage, and to continue to build on it.
David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Pat, a lot of these contenders appear to be eyeing 2024.
I don't know that Mike Pompeo is looking for anything like that, but he was in Congress. He's been head of the CIA. He's been Secretary of State. He's a brilliant guy. I mean, he's a very dedicated Christian. I think he was first in his class at West Point. And I might add, he has agreed to be the commencement speaker at the Regent University commencement. It's very good. I don't know if we're going to have it live or have it virtual or how it's going to be, but anyhow, Mike Pompeo, he is a terrific guy, brilliant fellow. And what he said, though, is so true. America has a destiny. America is a special place. We are an exceptional nation. And those who try to run it down and act like we're somehow racist and filled with slavery images and so forth, that just isn't what America is. America is the home of the free and the land of the brave, the home of the free. And we stand for liberty, and people all around the world look to us. And when we stop being that way, then we're in trouble, and the world is in trouble. But we, Ronald Reagan echoed something that was said by those early pilgrims in Massachusetts. We're a shining city on the hill, a shining city. And America is a very important place. And we should all thank God that we have this freedom that has been given to us, and none of us should take it lightly. And the last thing we should do is to join those people that are trying to tear it down. John?
Pat, Pope Francis is back in Rome after a whirlwind visit to Iraq. The Pope stirring the hopes of that country's Christians who have suffered at the hands of terrorists like the Islamic State for years.
Certainly, there will be moments when faith can waver, when it seems that God does not see or act. This was true for you in the darkest of days of the war, and it is true, too, in these days of global health crisis and great insecurity. At times like this, remember that Jesus is by your side. Do not stop dreaming. Do not give up. Do not lose hope.
Many Iraqi Christians lost homes or fled when ISIS took over. Since the Iraq War, their numbers dropping from over 1 million to about 250,000. Many hope the Pope's visit will help preserve the church in Iraq. And Pat, some of those images from that trip were just remarkable.
It's amazing. People need hope. They need some symbol of hope. And the Pope could be that way. He's sent some discordant messages along the way, I might add, but nevertheless, it's wonderful. He also went to Erbil, which is the head of the Kurdish group, and they're trying to establish a vibrant democracy in that area. We haven't given them much support, and the Turks want to eliminate them, but nevertheless, the Pope did go there as well.